A soft amber dawn washed the sapphire spires of the Stellarian royal capital, and the streets below swirled with ribbons of color. Vendors pushed hover carts of candied fruits, banners fluttered, and 1,000 instruments hummed a gentle welcome. Today was the coming-of-age festival for Princess Leora, youngest child of King Vorian and Queen Cerise. Palace historians had already declared it the grandest celebration in 5 generations, so every citizen wanted a glimpse of the shy princess who, until this morning, had barely spoken outside her tutor's chambers. Inside the throne hall, light poured through crystal ceilings and scattered like powder across marble floors. Nobles in shimmering robes lined each side of a long gold carpet, whispering polite hopes that the girl would choose a suitor from one of their proud houses. Leora's older siblings stood at attention, each rehearsing the same kind smile. At the far end, King Vorian sat tall, trying to look calm, though his fingers tapped the armrest. When the great horn signaled the princess's entrance, every voice fell silent. Leora stepped forward in a simple white gown that showed only a silver chain with a small stone set in the pendenta, quiet gift from her late mother. Court tradition said that when a royal child reached the age of starlight, must declare a wish for the future, often a field of study, a duty, or a choice of alliance. Everyone expected Leora to speak of music, painting, or perhaps distant exploration. Instead, she took a single breath, lifted her chin, and said in clear, firm words, "My wish is to marry a human from the world called Earth." The sentence echoed across the chamber like a dropped shield. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, then fans snapped shut, jaws dropped, and servants nearly tripped over their own tails. The king's eyes widened, yet he forced a nod for royal law. Said a first wish spoken before the court could never be ignored. Confusion rippled outward from the palace like a wave. In garden courtyards, nobles argued. Some called her request charming, others foolish, while a smaller group whispered about scandal. The royal council gathered within the hour in the map room, an oval chamber painted with all known star routes. The chief minister, a thin alien with silver gills, raised a quivering hand. "Majesty," he said, "no treaty binds us to Earth, and humans do not share our customs. Many will see this as a risk to security." The king listened, rubbing his beard, but he remembered how Leora had never asked for anything before. Love for his daughter weighed heavier than any fear of gossip. After long debate, he answered, "The law is clear. We must honor her wish, yet we shall do so with wisdom. We will invite a single human one, brave soul, to answer her call. If none come, Leora may reconsider on her own in time." The astronomers received the edict that same evening. High upon the obsidian tower, they tuned giant resonant dishes to the long path of the spiral arm. One by one, they loaded a message capsule, polite greeting, brief history of the Stellarian realm, and the princess's unusual request. They added star charts, translation matrices, even a small gift code that would build a music box for whoever received it. Engineers wrapped the data in bright quantum keys so no pirate could tamper with it. At midnight, the royal family gathered on the balcony overlooking the launch field. Leora clasped her hands and whispered thanks to the wind. The beacon rose on a pillar of blue flame, pierced the clouds, and vanished toward jump space one slim thread of hope aimed at a tiny blue planet. Days passed. Gossip writers filled scroll feeds with wild tales. Some predicted disaster if a human arrived. Others predicted romance fit for epic songs. The princess, meanwhile, kept to her lessons, steady and calm. Yet each dawn she returned to the balcony, eyes tracking sunrise, as though she could see her message racing among the stars. Her quiet courage impressed many palace guards, who began to defend her choice when arguments grew sharp in the corridors. Still, a faction of old nobles met in secret, plotting ways to stop an earthling from ever reaching the palace gates. Across the galaxy, the beacon shot through jump lanes at almost the speed of thought and burst into orbit above Earth. Orbital sensors caught it first, and soon news networks interrupted morning shows with urgent headlines. "Alien Kingdom seeks human husband for royal princess." Images of the sleek silver capsule flashed on screens from Tokyo to New York. Officials scrambled to decode the message, but the Stellarian gift code unfolded itself into perfect English and many other languages, explaining the invitation with surprising grace. In a small coastal town, a cargo pilot named Mason Carter watched the broadcast on a portable tablet while fixing a weather-worn shuttle wing. He blinked, thought it was a prank, refreshed the feed twice, and then read every line. Mason was 27, tall and quiet, known for moving relief parcels to colonies where larger freighters dared not land. He had chased storms, dodged pirates, and once guided a burning science pod down without losing lives. Yet nothing in his logbook hinted at courtship with an alien princess. Still, the idea lit a spark of boyish wonder he had not felt since flight school. Throughout the day, Mason listened to politicians argue on talk shows about protocol, culture gaps, and the risk of insulting an unknown kingdom. Experts lined studio desks to predict doom while comedians cracked jokes about interstellar weddings. By sunset, Mason sat on an old pier, watching gulls reach for crumbs. He thought about how the princess must have stood before her own people, making a wish no one expected. The courage behind that act tugged at his sense of adventure. From his coat pocket, he took a folded photo of his late grandmother, who always said, "Never ignore a call that sounds impossible. That's how stories begin." Mason's mind settled like a compass needle. He opened a portable console and typed a short message to the United Earth Liaison Office, volunteering as candidate for Stellarian invitation. Experience, independent pilot, cross-cultural aid. Work, fluent in 5 trade tongues, ready to travel at once. Night deepened. On Two Worlds, citizens stared at the same bright stars, wondering where destiny might pull them next. In the royal palace, Princess Leora finally left her balcony, but as she closed her door, a gentle breeze curled around the pendant at her neck, making the earth stone glimmer. Far away, Mason powered down his console, unaware that his message had already leaped into a diplomatic queue racing back through jump space. Their paths set in motion by one bold wish and one quiet answer, were drawing closer with every heartbeat, and somewhere deep in the corridors of the palace, those who feared change sharpened their plans, whispering that no human would ever sit beside the throne. Mason woke before sunrise the next day, his heart full of both hope and worry. He slept little after sending his message to the Earth Liaison Office. He replayed every line in his mind, wondering if his simple words had carried the weight of his true intent. When his device buzzed, he held his breath. Calm voice spoke. "Mason Carter, your candidacy is accepted. Prepare for departure in 72 hours. Relief washed over him like warm rain. He smiled, then closed his eyes and let himself believe that he could really do this. As word spread through the small town, friends and neighbors gathered at Mason's hangar. They crowded around his old shuttle, speaking all at once. Some praised his courage, others warned him of danger. A co-pilot named Jessica shook her head. "You don't even know what their air feels like," she said. "What if you offend them by breathing wrong?" Mason just laughed. He touched the faded photo of his grandmother, taped to the cockpit wall. Her kind eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. He whispered, "This is for you." Earth's United Liaison Service was a dozen stories of glass and steel beside the coast. Mason walked its halls in a borrowed suit that felt stiff and strange. He met officials who showed him star charts, cultural guides, and emergency protocols. They gave him a small packet of translation implants and a simple universal clothing set. Each item bore the Stellarian crest of a silver spire on blue fields. He packed them carefully, as though each stitch carried a message of trust. In a polished briefing room, Mason met Sira, the veteran alien navigator. She stood tall and slender, her lavender skin softly glowing under bright lights. Her eyes were dark pools of calm intelligence. "I have flown through 5 war zones and mapped 11 systems," she told him in careful English. "You have good skills. Together, we will reach Stellaria." Her voice was gentle, but carried authority. Mason bowed his head in respect, felt both relief and awe. He realized he would learn more from her than any manual could teach. That evening, Mason returned to the hangar beneath the stars. He walked along the hull of his shuttle, touching its cool metal panels. Far above, the Earth's moon hung silent. He thought of Princess Leora standing in her palace, watching dawn break over crystal spires. He thought of all the voices telling her no, and how she had spoken out anyway. Her courage and his own had begun a journey neither of them could fully imagine. On the day of departure, a crowd gathered to watch. Local news crews lined the launch pad, aiming bright cameras at the shuttle. Mason felt a tug of nerves as he climbed inside. He arranged his few belongings in the small cabin, then took his seat. Sira entered behind him, her movements precise and steady. She placed data pads on the console and tested each control. Beside her, a small orb of light hovered an AI translator known as Vero. It had no voice box. Instead, it projected words on the view screen. "Welcome aboard, Mason Carter," it displayed. Mason nodded and tapped the console in greeting. The engines ignited with a low rumble that shook the floor outside the viewport. The sky glowed gold. Mason gripped the armrests as the shuttle lifted smoothly. He watched the town shrink into a patchwork of lights and fields. In moments, they broke through the clouds, and the sun glowed white above the blue curve of Earth. He felt a wave of awe so powerful that tears stung his eyes. He wiped them quickly and turned to Sira, who offered a small, knowing smile. During the long jump to Stellaria, Mason spent hours with Sira and Vero. Sira taught him the basics of stellar navigation. She pointed to constellations he had never heard. "This one is called the Lion's Watch," she said. "It marks safe passage through neutral space." Vero translated so that Mason could read every word in simple English. Mason practiced Stellarian greetings again and again. He stumbled over the clicks and soft breaths required by the language. Vero corrected him gently, and Sira nodded. "Good effort," she encouraged. "You will improve." As they neared jump space, Mason leaned against the console and thought of home. He pictured his mother's kitchen, bright with spice jars, and his father's hands fixing old engines. He thought of Jessica's teasing grin and his grandmother's quiet faith. Then he thought of Princess Leora, waiting so far away. And he felt the compass inside him swing toward purpose again. The jump itself was smooth and fast. Outside the viewport, stars blurred into bright lines, then vanished. Mason felt weight shift in his body. The cabin lights flickered as the engines recalibrated. Seconds later, the shuttle reappeared in the glitter of a new star cluster. Mason blinked. He saw twin suns shining on violet clouds that rolled over mountains taller than any on Earth. He gasped and rubbed his eyes. Stellaria said, softly, "Home." Inside the shuttle, they checked systems and set a course for the royal palace. Vero scrolled through palace codes and security clearances. Mason studied the final checklist with care. Each line reminded him of the stakes. Diplomatic greeting, cultural etiquette, public appearance. The navigator's eyes met his. "Remember," she said, "you represent your world now. Show who we can be when we choose peace." Mason swallowed and straightened. He pressed a finger against a panel and said aloud in clear Stellarian, "I am honored." As they descended toward the crystal spires, Mason watched the palace grow beneath them. Fields of glowing plants spread in neat rows around the landing zone. Elegant walkways curved like ribbons between towers. Guards in silver armor stood at attention as the shuttle touched down on a smooth platform, engines powered down with a hiss. Mason felt both fear and excitement tighten in his chest. He reached for his pack, then stood and took a deep breath. The ramp lowered. Mason stepped out into warm air, scented with sweet flowers and sea brine. Sira followed him, her gaze calm. Vero floated above, projecting the princess's greeting. In many tongues, a small group of palisades and translators approached. They bowed, each one solemn and silent. Mason bowed back, trying to keep his voice steady. He said, "Thank you for this chance," Vero translated. A young aide offered a hand. Mason took it, feeling history shift beneath their feet. Behind him, shuttle stood ready to return, but Mason's path lay forward down a path of polished stone toward the palace gates and into a world that had once seemed only a dream. Every step echoed in his mind: honor, courage, and the promise of a future written by a princess's bold wish and a simple human's answer. At sunrise, the palace garden glowed with soft light. Mason stepped through an arch of white flowers and paused. Round him stood 5 alien suitors, tall and proud in bright robes. Each held a small lantern of crystal that glowed with their home, world's colors. Mason felt his heart beat faster, but he kept his shoulders straight. Palisades moved between the suitors, arranging benches for a public test. The princess watched from a raised dais, pale dress shimmering like starlight. On water, she offered Mason a soft nod. He bowed and smiled, though his palms felt damp. In that moment, he knew he was not just a guest, but a competitor for a heart larger than any he had ever known. The first test was called the Trial of Reflection. Each suitor received a mirror orb and a small list of virtues: kindness, honesty, courage. The task was to find someone in need and show one of these virtues. Mason studied the list. He saw 3 other suitors slip away toward the palace hall. They moved with careful steps, hoping to impress many people at once. Mason instead turned toward a side path where a young palace servant sat alone, cleaning a long marble bench. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped. Mason knelt and offered a fresh cloth and a gentle word. "Your work makes the garden shine," he said. Her eyes brightened as she nodded. He cleaned beside her until every stone gleamed. When he rose, the princess's orb glowed softly in his hand, showing the image of compassion. Word of his act spread quickly through the soft wind. Palace guards whispered of his kindness to each other, and guests shifted in their seats. Next, the suitors gathered in the main courtyard for the public ceremony. The princess spoke in a clear voice that reached every ear. "We honor those who serve not for glory, but for care." As she spoke, Mason stepped forward to stand beside the other suitors. His simple tunic felt strange among their ornate outfits. He smoothed each fold, reminding himself why he was here. When the princess finished, a hush fell. Then the nobles in the front row began to clap. Mason joined in, applauding his fellow contestants with genuine warmth. Suddenly, a crystal pitcher on a carved table tipped over. Water poured onto the stone floor and slipped toward Mason's boots. Hidden lever had been triggered by a jealous courtier. Gasps rose. Mason froze for a heartbeat. Then he grinned and dipped his hand into the shallow pool. He scooped up water and offered it to a dry stone flower carved into the plaza. "Even stone deserves a drink," he said with a laugh. Strangers chuckled, and guards moved to mop the floor. The princess smiled at his quick wit. The other suitors looked uncertain, their carefully rehearsed lines forgotten. After the ceremony, a small crowd gathered around Mason. Children held out colorful butterflies in cages, asking him to set them free. He knelt again, opened each cage, and watched the insects flutter into the air. The courtyard filled with light, color, and soft applause. He helped a wounded pet creature, a tiny furred animal with silver stripes, back into its crate. Gentle act filled his orb with brighter light, and the mirror showed him his own face, illuminated by joy. He felt a warmth in his chest, stronger than nerves. Meanwhile, the hidden faction of nobles seethed in secret chambers. They pored over palace maps, looking for more ways to embarrass the human. One whispered, "If he fears water, we shall give him rain indoors." Another smiled cruelly and touched a switch under a fountain. They prepared a second prank for the next day's test, hoping to break his calm. They spoke of his simple clothes and quiet smile as though they were weapons to be shattered. But word of their plotting had already drifted to a few honest advisors who shook their heads. "Danger must not be sown with malice," one said. The chief guard agreed to watch for traps in stone and shadow. That night the moon rose over, jagged towers painted gold by starlight. Mason walked a low terrace near the palace lake, his reflection soft in black water. He thought of the young servant's tired eyes, the children's butterflies, and the princess's kindly gaze. He whispered to the breeze, "I only hope I can be true to this chance." Far above, The palace spires hummed with magic and ceremony. Hidden watchers in silken robes counted on his fear. He pressed a hand to the earth, feeling its solid calm beneath his boots. Sleep was far from him, but his mind stayed open and ready. In the heart of the palace, the princess studied the stars painted on her bedroom ceiling. She recalled Mason's kindness in the garden, his humor in the courtyard. She felt astonished that someone from a distant world could show such care for stone and creature alike. Her sisters watched silently as she rose and walked to her desk. She wrote a simple note of thanks with trembling hand. Then she slipped from her chambers into the night corridor, determined to speak with the human before dawn. The secret corridors smelled of cool marble and jasmine. She paused at the arch, took a deep breath, and followed the path to where Mason might wait, down below.
Oh.
Mason sensed a presence by the terrace wall. He peered through the lattice of vines and saw the princess's silhouette. Relief and joy lifted his heart. He stood and bowed, surprised at his own boldness. She smiled and said in her soft voice, "You have done more than pass a test. You have shown what a human heart can hold." Mason felt his throat tighten. He replied, "I only tried to be kind, as I would at home." My eyes shone like twin stars above violet clouds. They talked in gentle tones under the moon about home, fear, and hope, forging a new promise in quiet words. By the time the first birds called the dawn, the princess returned to her quarters, and Mason slipped back too. The garden terrace. They left each other with silent bows, knowing that tomorrow's test would come with new challenges. Yet each had learned that courage and kindness could light the darkest trap. Mason touched the stone path with renewed calm. Above him, palace. Guards watched from hidden windows and smiles touched their lips. They had never seen a suitor so simple and brave, and the story of a human who could laugh at water began to travel fast through the marble halls. At dawn, the palace awoke to news of a terrible crime. The sacred gem called the Star of Stellaria had vanished from its display in the grand hall. Palace guards rushed through corridors speaking in hushed tones. Mason lay asleep in a small guest room only steps from the hall where he had slept the night before. But before he could rise, a guard opened his door with harsh light. "You are to come at once," the guard said. Mason sat up, heart pounding. He followed the guard down the marble stairs, unaware that every eye in the palace watched him with suspicion. In the throne room, a circle of anxious aides and nobles crowded around an empty display. A low murmur ran through the crowd as the chief minister stood in front of the king's throne. Princess Leora waited beside her father, tears in her eyes. "This gem represents my mother's promise to our people," she said in a trembling voice. "To lose it is to lose a part of our history." She turned and saw Mason in the doorway. Her hope flickered, but doubt clouded her gaze. She wondered if she had made a mistake in trusting a stranger from Earth. The guard who led Mason spoke. "Quietly, they found you near the hall last night. They say you had the token the gem was kept on. You must explain yourself." Mason swallowed hard. He remembered only the moonlit walk in the garden. He had not touched the gem or the display. Yet he saw the worried faces of palace staff. One noble whispered that a human could slip away at night and steal treasures. Fear pinched at Mason's chest, but he forced himself to speak. "I did not touch the gem," he said. "Please let me prove my innocence." King Vorian rose and raised a hand. His voice echoed through the hall. "Mason Carter has been invited to our world by my daughter's wish. The law grants him one chance to clear his name. He shall have until sunset to find the true culprit. If he fails, he will forfeit his right to stand beside my daughter." A hush fell. The princess bit her lip but nodded. The burden felt heavy, yet he felt relief that the king believed him enough to give him a chance. Mason left the throne room guided by a young guard named Rill, who had shown him kindness in the garden. Rill was quiet but firm, and he spoke in low tones as they walked. "I saw nobles meeting in the West Wing last night," Rill said. "They spoke of a plan to discredit you. I thought a human would be blamed icily." Mason listened, mind racing. He asked Rill to bring him to the temple where the gem had been kept. Rill agreed and led him through secret passages that smelled of cool stone and candle wax. In the temple, marble columns rose like frozen waterfalls. The display stand was empty, and fine dust lay on the floor in a perfect circle. Mason studied. The ground and saw a thin ribbon of cloth caught on a rough edge. The cloth was deep blue, similar to the robes of one of the alien suitors. He knelt and gently lifted the cloth fragment. Rill watched as Mason examined it under a small lantern. "This cloth is from Suitor Krell's robes," Mason said softly. "He has the only robes in that shade." Rill's eyes widened. They needed proof beyond a torn ribbon. Mason and Rill moved to the west wing. Moonlight fell through tall windows onto carpets that ran like rivers of red silk. They found a private council chamber where Krell and 2 other nobles had met. On a wooden table lay a small pouch half open. Inside, Mason spotted a broken piece of the gem's setting. He reached forward, but a soft step behind made them freeze. Rill stood ready by the door, and Mason held the cloth and the gem piece in his hands. They had what they needed. Without a word, Rill nodded and slipped away to fetch palace guards. Mason remained silent, eyes fixed on the pile of papers on the table. He bent and took one paper, seeing details of the plan to frame him. The words spoke of planting the gem's token in Mason's quarters and of using a trap in the ceremonial hall to distract the guard. He slipped the note into his pocket. The air felt cold and heavy with betrayal. He wondered how many others helped Krell. In secret, soon Rill returned with 2 armed guards. They formed a small circle around Mason, Rill, and the council chamber. "We need to bring this to the king now," Rill said. Mason nodded. They walked swiftly through silent halls, carrying the cloth fragment and the gem piece and the stolen document. Corners of the tapestries whispered their passage. At the entrance to the throne room, Rill motioned for quiet. Mason took a steadying breath and stepped inside. The king sat in his high seat, the princess beside him. Nobles and guards watched as Mason bowed. Rill placed the cloth fragment on the throne steps. Mason held up the broken gem piece for all to see, then drew the note and laid it on the golden floor. "Your Majesty, this cloth matches Suitor Krell's robes. This broken setting came from the hidden pouch in the west wing. The paper here shows the plan to steal the gem and blame me." He spoke in clear, calm words. A hush filled the hall. Prince Krell, seated among other suitors, rose in fury. "This is a lie," he shouted. "I did nothing wrong." The palace guards had come with Rill and stood behind Krell, holding the pouch. They removed the gem fragment and handed it to the chief minister. The document fell at Krell's feet. The minister read aloud, "When Mason Carter is blamed, we gain power in the council." Krell's face went pale. The others who sat near him looked away. The king's eyes burned with disappointment. King Vorian stood and spoke in a steady voice. "This conspiracy against my daughter's chance and against our guests cannot stand. Krell and his co-conspirators will answer for their crime. The Star of Stellaria will be returned to its place tomorrow, and those who plotted its theft will face exile." He gestured, and palace guards seized Krell. The crowd parted to let them through. Whispers of relief rose like birds taking flight. Mason felt tension drain from his shoulders as the king's words settled. Princess Leora looked at Mason with eyes full of trust. She stood and crossed the room to where he still knelt. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, "You have shown more than bravery. You have shown truth." Mason rose and bowed to her. Around them, the hall felt different, as if fresh air had swept away lies. Yet some nobles in the back whispered of their loss and cast dark looks at Mason. The princess saw them and straightened her back, determined to stand by her choice. That night, Mason returned to his quarters escorted by Rill. The borrowed tunic felt lighter now. He placed the cloth fragment in a small box and looked at the gem piece, still warm from its hiding spot. He thought of the trust the princess had shown and of the king's fair judgment. Outside his window, stars glittered like stones waiting to be found. Mason closed his eyes, knowing dawn would bring a new day of tests and choices. He felt ready, for he had faced the darkest trick and shown that a human's heart could stay true even when accused. Mason stood in the war room long before dawn, watching holomaps of the outer moons flicker red with enemy markers. Palace shields dipped and shimmered under laser volleys. Round him generals barked orders, voices tight with fear. The moons. Mining outposts cried for help, and each breath felt heavy with worry. Mason's heart beat steady, but his mind raced through every delivery run he had ever flown. He remembered slow cargo convoys dodging storms and pirates, and he saw a path. Others failed to notice. The lead general, a broad-shouldered alien in plated armor, slammed a fist on the map table. "We must strike their fleet head-on," he roared. "Bring forward the heavy cruisers. Bombard them until they break." Round the table, others nodded, faces grim. Mason listened, arms folded. He sensed their trap, a costly clash that risked every ship. Silence fell as he cleared his throat, surprising even himself. "What if we use what we know best? Drones and decoys?" he asked. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Mason sketched his idea on a side holoscreen. "We load our old cargo drones with sensor flares and small jammer modules," he explained. "They fly along convoy routes. Enemy weapons will lock on them thinking they're freighters. When their shields drain, we send our fighters behind to strike the flagship's shield generator. By then, their formation breaks and we push them back." Murmurs rose. A few laughed at the notion of using harmless freighter drones. Mason met their doubt with calm words. "It works on Earth. Simple plans win wars." Within hours, engineers crowded the loading bay. Mason led a team that mixed human and Stellarian tech experts. Jessica, his old co-pilot, rewrote drone flight codes while Rill, the palace guard, secured the launch platforms. Vero, the AI translator, floated among them, projecting updates in clear English. Sierra plotted flanking routes through a nearby asteroid cluster so fighters could slip in unseen. Oil-stained workbenches gave way to neat rows of drones, each fitted with blinking modules and painted to mimic cargo holds. Tension crackled, but every hand moved with purpose. As dusk fell over the moons, cargo drones lifted in silent rows. They traced the old mineral lanes toward the hunting grounds of the rival fleet. Sensors hummed as the jammer modules went live, and flares popped in coded patterns to draw attention. Enemy scanners lit up with false cargo signatures. On the command deck, Mason watched through a viewport as the first wave of enemy lasers struck the empty shells of the drones. Shields flared and collapsed. Drones spun out of control, then their flares pierced the gloom in bright bursts. "Now," Mason whispered. He climbed into the cockpit of a nimble escort vessel. Around him, starfighters roared to life, wings folded. For speed, he keyed his come. "Follow my lead. Target the flagship's vent array." Jessica's voice crackled back. "On it." Vero displayed a live feed of the enemy command ship, its shield generator glowing in the center of its hull. Mason eased his craft through the gap left by the distracted fleet. Fighters slicing beside him like silver knives. With precise timing, Jessica released an electromagnetic pulse torpedo that streaked toward the vent cluster. Seconds later, a pulse wave spread across the flagship's hull. Lights dimmed and its shields sputtered out. Alarm klaxons screamed across the comms. Mason rolled his ship to bring his lasers to bear, cutting into the crippled flank. Behind him, Allied starfighters pressed in, firing focused bursts. Flagship shuddered, then drifted, dead in space. Seeing their leader fall, the enemy formation fractured. Smaller cruisers spun to flee, but Allied ships tore into their rearguard. Mason barked orders through Vero's voice projection. "Hold the line. Push them to the jump gate." Fleets converged from all sides, human and Stellarian, working in sync. Cheers rose on the comms as enemy hulls buckled under sustained fire. Every pilot felt a surge of hope, a sense that this strange human had shown them how to win. Within minutes, enemy ships limped toward the gate and disappeared into jump space. Silence blanketed the dark sky, broken only by the crackle of comms and the hum of engines. On the command deck, generals and aides stared at the holomap, speechless. Then the lead general turned to Mason, face lined with relief. "Your plan?" "Saved us," he said, voice thick. "We owe you our lives." Mason bowed his head in respect. Around him, officers clapped, some with tears in their eyes. On the palace observation deck, Princess Leora watched through a great window as the Allied fleet returned in shining formation. Her breath caught when she saw Mason's escort vessel glide home, wingtip lights glowing like a prayer. Crowds in the streets below cheered, banners snapping in the wind. Palisades handed her detailed reports of the victory. She pressed a hand to her heart and whispered thanks to the stars, and to the simple human who dared to dream a new way. That night, the royal courtyard brimmed with celebration. Musicians played songs of victory, dancers spun like comets under lantern light, and servants passed trays of sweet spiced teas. King Vorian rose on a balcony and proclaimed a day of peace and honor for all who fought. He singled out Mason Carter, calling him hero of Stellaria. The princess stepped forward and placed a bronze medal at Mason's feet. He knelt and accepted it, voice low but steady. "I only did what anyone should protect the people who trusted me." As the crowd roared their approval, Mason looked to the sky where moons loomed like silent guardians. He felt the weight of his medal against his chest, yet in his heart he was light as a cargo drone freed. He thought of final challenges waiting. At dawn, the ceremony that would decide his place beside the princess. But for now, in the glow of shared triumph, he allowed himself to believe that a human's courage and a simple plan could change the fate of worlds. Part 6. Dawn broke over Stellaria as twin suns rose above the crystal spires. Golden light danced on marble pillars and painted long shadows across the courtyard. Princess Leora stood on a raised dais in a simple gown of pale silver silk. Held a single bloom from the moonlit garden sand, iris native to her world. Beneath her, rows of guests gathered. Nobles in bright robes, honored warriors, and envoys from distant planets. All eyes turned to the entrance where the human suitor would soon appear. Mason stepped onto the polished stone path, his borrowed tunic gleaming with the Stellarian crest. Beside him walked Sira, Rill, and several human delegates chosen to represent. Earth Mason's hands were steady, and his heart beat like a calm drum. He looked up at the princess, their eyes meeting across the space that law and custom had once made wide. A hush fell as the royal herald raised his voice, announcing the union that would bind two worlds together. The officiator, an elder with soft blue skin and silver hair, spoke laconically in Stellarian. Above the crowd, Vero, the AI translated, each phrase into dozens of tongues, scrolling across floating glyphs of light. Promises of honor, loyalty, and mutual care filled the air. Simple words carried weight. "I choose you, I trust you, I stand with you." With every vow, Mason and Leora repeated the lines in clear English and in the ancient tongue, showing respect for both heritage and heart. When it came time for rings, Mason took from his pocket a delicate band of earth-forged steel. Inside, a small earth stone glimmered with green life. Leora offered a ring woven from starlight threads that held a petal of her iris. Each placed the ring on the other's finger with gentle care. When their hands met, a soft hum rippled through the spires, as though the palace itself rejoiced. Leora's bloom glowed. Mason's stone shone like a small promise between their palms. Cheers rose, stronger than any before. Trumpets blared from balconies. Petals rained from overhead gardens as guests tossed handfuls of glowing flowers. At the same moment, on a marble platform beside the dais, ambassadors sealed a new treaty. Earth and Stellaria pledged to share knowledge, protect trade routes, and aid each other in times of need. Each signature etched in silver ink glimmered under the twin suns, binding to peoples in law as strong as the vows just spoken. Standing before the crowd, Leora lifted her voice. "Mason Carter," she said softly, "you crossed the stars to answer my wish. You showed me kindness, courage, and truth. Today I choose you not for duty, but for love." Mason bowed and touched her hand. "Leora," he replied, "you asked for a human, and I came. I found more than a duty. I found home." Their words carried across the courtyard. And even those who once doubted felt a spark of hope kindle in their hearts. After the ceremony, lanterns lit the winding paths of the palace gardens. Tables groaned under platters of spiced fruits, crystal, jellies, and sweet pastries glazed with honey from Earth's hives. Alien musicians played gentle tunes as dancers in flowing robes invited humans to join. Mason laughed as he tried a step taught by an alien general, and Leora clapped in delight. Strangers became friends in moments, sharing food and stories beneath the violet sky as starlight began to gather overhead. Late that afternoon, the newlyweds boarded the royal cruiser Dawn's Promise for the journey to Earth. Crowds lined the landing platform, waving scarves of silver and blue. Rill and Syrah stood at the ramp saluting with pride. Mason carried Leora's hand across the threshold, and together they stepped inside the sleek vessel. As the ramp folded and engines powered up, a choir of voices sang an ancient hymn of farewell and new beginnings. Through the viewport, Stellaria receded into a field of light. Mason and Leora stood side by side, watching crystal towers fade into distant stars. Leora leaned against him and whispered, "I cannot wait to show you your world." Mason smiled and replied, "I cannot wait to stand beside you in mine." Behind them, diplomats unrolled maps and prepared introductions. Ahead lay the blue world they both called home, drawn closer now by vows, rings, and treaties. The journey through jump space was smooth and bright. Outside their cabin, stars blurred into brilliant lines. Inside, the couple shared stories of childhood. Leora described gardens beneath twin suns, and Mason spoke of oceans and mountain roads. They dreamed aloud of a future where children of both worlds might learn together under open skies. Each sentence wove their lives closer, as if the walls of the cruiser themselves leaned in to listen. When the cruiser emerged above Earth's blue-green curve, Leora pressed her hand to the viewport. She saw cities gleam, rivers, wind, and clouds drift in quiet grace. Mason stood behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. Worlds apart they once were, now united by one bold wish and many leaps of faith. As they prepared for descent, Mason whispered, "This is only the beginning." Leora nodded, eyes bright with promise. Together they watched Earth turn beneath them, ready to build the next chapter of unity and hope.